They left Atlanta with matching gold bands and matching passports, smiling hand in hand, walking toward the gate that would take them to paradise. To the outside world, Wendell Carter and Deontay Harris had it all. A love that survived judgment, a wedding that spared no expense, and a future that looked as clear as the waters waiting for them in the Maldives. But love is rarely what it seems when no one's watching. By the 5th night of their honeymoon, only one of them would make it out of the villa alive. No forced entry, no missing valuables, just a shattered glass, a blood-stained sheet, and a husband with an answer that didn't quite fit the question. What happened behind that locked door in a place built for romance? Why would a man promise forever and take a life before the week was over? According to investigators, the truth unraveled quickly, but not without a twist. One that pointed to a man thousands of miles from home, a first-class flight, and a brief encounter at 35,000 feet. This isn't a story about a failed marriage. It's a story about temptation, control, and the decisions we make when we think no one will ever find out. Wendell Carter, Deontay Harris, Marcus Reed, 3 men, 1 luxury resort, and a crime that left everyone asking the same question. How far would you go to get what you think you deserve? This is the story of how a dream honeymoon turned into a deadly love triangle. If you're drawn to the hidden truths behind the headlines, if you believe every crime has a deeper story, make sure to hit the like button, share this video with fellow true crime minds, and subscribe for more real-life cases. Wendell Carter wasn't the kind of man who needed to chase anything. At 38, he had already conquered what most people spend a lifetime dreaming of. Founder of a successful Atlanta-based tech firm, he was sharp, precise, and always dressed like he was headed to a boardroom, even on his days off. His neatly trimmed beard, streaked with soft white strands, gave him an air of wisdom. People called him brilliant, calculated, a man who kept his circles small and his emotions even smaller. Then came Deontay. Deontay Harris, 33, was everything Wendell wasn't. Open, expressive, the type to cry during movies and laugh loud enough to turn heads in restaurants. He wore oversized glasses, colorful blazers, and a smile that made people forget they'd just met him. He was a rising name in luxury interior design, flipping million-dollar condos and building an Instagram following that adored every one of his perfectly curated rooms. Deontay saw beauty everywhere, and when he saw Wendell, he believed he'd found the one place he could finally rest. They met at a business conference in Miami. One late-night bar conversation turned into a weekend, then into a year, then into a public coming-out post with 2 hands intertwined and a caption that read, "Worth the wait." In the photos, they looked like soulmates. Wendell, stoic, strong. Deontay, glowing, head tilted against his shoulder. They wore coordinated outfits, traveled often, and shared filtered glimpses of what many called black gay excellence. But what the camera never caught was the shift beneath the surface. The way Wendell flinched when Deontay raised his voice. The way Deontay apologized too often for things that didn't need apologies. Or the long silences between them when the likes stopped rolling in. Still, when they announced the wedding, no one saw a red flag. They spared no expense. Chandeliers, string quartets, white roses imported from Ecuador. Wendell's vows read like an investor's pitch, promises of protection, stability, and loyalty. Deontay's voice cracked through tears as he said, "You're my forever." The honeymoon destination was Deontay's idea, the Maldives. He called it their reset, a blank page where the past didn't matter, and love could start fresh under blue skies and quiet waves. But some pages, no matter how carefully turned, still hold stains you can't wash away. Neither man could have imagined that within just 5 days, their vows would turn to silence, and one of them would never come home. What happened between paradise and betrayal began on the flight there, at 35,000 feet, with a stranger who smiled a little too long and left a trail that would lead straight to murder. They arrived in the Maldives just after noon, greeted on the tarmac by island staff holding welcome signs and chilled glasses of mango juice. The sun was high, the waves gentle, the air heavy with salt and jasmine. It was the kind of setting designed to erase reality, and for a while, it did. Wendell and Deontay were checked into the resort's premier overwater villa, a secluded glass-paneled suite with a private plunge pool, sunset view, and 24-hour butler service. The kind of place where everything looked perfect, even if it wasn't. According to resort staff, the couple kept to themselves. No honeymoon selfies, no sunset dinners with wine and giggles, just quiet walks, hushed conversations, and long periods where only one was seen. Usually Deontay, wandering the spa garden alone or reading near the ocean bar. One housekeeper later recalled, they were respectful, polite, but something didn't feel like love. It felt like tension that had already been there before they got off the plane. Sources say Deontay wanted to book excursions, snorkeling, beach horseback riding, a romantic sandbank dinner. Wendell declined each one. He preferred the villa, the privacy, control. By the third night, Deontay posted a single Instagram story, a blurry shot of the moon, captioned, "This place is beautiful, but something about it feels hollow." It was gone within the hour. And then there was the flight. It wasn't just a coincidence. Wendell's seat had been upgraded to business class at the last minute. A quiet perk extended by a fan of his software company who happened to work for the airline. That's where he met Marcus Reed, 28. Tall, bronze-skinned, striking with a lean frame and a jawline that earned him a modest but notable modeling contract in Johannesburg. But Marcus didn't model full-time. He was a flight attendant, sharp uniform, white teeth, and a gaze that lingered half a second longer than it should have. He offered Wendell champagne. They laughed, talked about island life. Marcus complimented his wedding band. Wendell didn't mention who he married. To Marcus, it seemed harmless. To Wendell, it was something else. A rush he hadn't felt in years, something unspoken, dangerous. And that one brief encounter at 35,000 feet, just a few seconds, a few smiles, a few exchanged glances, was supposed to mean nothing. But it became everything. It started with a number. After that first encounter in the sky, Wendell found a way to linger near the galley during the flight's descent, claiming a minor issue with the in-flight entertainment system. That's when Marcus handed him a slip of paper, scribbled on it. Just a first name and a string of numbers. Casual. Discreet. Wendell slid it into his wallet without looking. No words exchanged. No need. They both knew. By the time they landed in Maldives, Marcus had already disappeared through the crew exit. Wendell joined Deontay at baggage claim like nothing had happened. But something had. Back at the villa, Deontay was giddy. He unpacked, danced to music on the terrace, took photos of the view. Wendell smiled, kissed him, played along, and then, when Deontay drifted off into a midday nap, Wendell slipped into the bathroom with his phone and typed a message he'd later delete. "Kay, it's me." The response came an hour later. "Didn't expect you to text, but I'm glad you did." What followed was a stream of midnight messages typed when Deontay was asleep, when the lights were low, and the ocean hummed quietly outside the glass windows. Messages full of flirtation, hesitation, and something darker. Hotel logs later showed Wendell often left the villa alone. He told Deontay he needed air or wanted to walk off jet lag, but according to surveillance footage, his walks were never random. They often took him along the perimeter paths of the staff dormitories. Multiple resort employees later confirmed sightings of Marcus near the property. Even though he had no reason to be there, he wasn't on shift. He wasn't staying at the resort, but he appeared, leaning on fences, walking the shoreline near the private villas, once even ducking behind a maintenance shed when staff passed by. One bartender remembered him clearly. He was handsome, hard to forget, always looking around like he was waiting for someone, like he wasn't supposed to be there. And while Deontay booked couples massages and private dinners, Wendell made excuses. He blamed work emergencies, migraines, exhaustion. But at 1:42 a.m. on the 4th...
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
Night, he sent a message to Marcus that police would later recover from a forensic phone scan. "I wish I met you before I got married." Marcus replied, "What would you have done differently?" Wendell didn't answer right away. But the next morning, he called the airline directly, told them he needed to make a change to his return flight. He wanted a different time, a different route, said it was for business. What he didn't mention was the real reason. Marcus had already told him his next scheduled flight home was on that route, and Wendell was making sure they'd see each other again. He even offered to fly business again out of pocket just to secure the seat. What began as an impulsive flirtation was now a planned reunion. Something secret, something he didn't want to walk away from. At the same time, Deontay had grown distant, quiet. His eyes lingered longer on Wendell's phone, his questions a little more pointed. One night, he asked directly, "Is there something you're not telling me?" Wendell kissed his forehead and said, "Don't ruin the trip." But the trip was already ruined, and neither of them knew just how far it would go. Was this just an affair, or the beginning of something deadly? It was the night before they were scheduled to fly home. A week in paradise coming to an end, or so it seemed. At 8:14 p.m., security footage shows Wendell and Deontay entering the resort's oceanfront restaurant. It was their last dinner reservation, one Deontay had insisted on keeping. Candles, lobster, a table for two, right on the water. But nothing about the meal looked romantic. Deontay appeared tense, shoulders tight. Wendell sat with his arms crossed, barely touching his wine. Staff would later report that the couple exchanged only a few words, and none of them were warm. Then, near the end of the meal, Deontay stood up, walked a few paces away, his voice raised. Wendell followed him. What was said isn't captured by audio, but surveillance shows Deontay gesturing angrily, pointing toward the villa. He looked betrayed, hurt. Wendell stayed calm. Too calm. One waitress recalled it vividly. It wasn't loud enough for everyone to hear, but you could feel the tension. He looked heartbroken, like he knew something he wasn't supposed to find out. They left the restaurant separately. Deontay walked fast, barefoot, holding his shoes. Wendell stayed behind, paid the check, tipped heavily. Then he walked out with his hands in his pockets, slowly. At 11:27 p.m., a guest staying in the villa 2 doors down called the front desk to report a loud thudding noise. Not a scream, not a crash, just a sudden impact, then silence. Hotel security was dispatched, but by the time they reached Wendell and Deontay's villa, the lights were off and no one answered the door. Since there was no report of injury or immediate danger, the incident was logged but not followed up. At 7:42 a.m. the next morning, room service arrived with their pre-scheduled breakfast. No answer. After multiple attempts, a manager used a key to enter the villa. Inside, the room was quiet. The air conditioning hummed, the curtains were still drawn, and Deontay Harris was lying in bed. At first, they thought he was asleep, but his face was turned downward, blood on the sheets, a pool that looked far too much like a crime scene. Wendell was nowhere to be found. As Wendell repeated his version of events, detectives began cross-checking everything: flight itineraries, resort surveillance, device logs. Then came the turning point. Wendell's browser history was deleted, but not beyond recovery. Days before Deontay was found dead, Wendell had searched how to strangle someone without leaving fingerprints. Plane ticket change policies for couples. Can grief delay police investigation? How to make it look like someone died in their sleep. That last search was timestamped 48 hours before Deontay's death. Done from Wendell's phone inside the villa. You don't just stumble across those kinds of searches. He was planning this. The internet doesn't lie. Back in Atlanta, the news had already broken. A newlywed honeymoon turned deadly. But no one was more shattered than Deontay's mother, Charlene Harris. They were just married. We were planning a celebration when they got back. Dante was so happy, so in love. He didn't deserve this. None of this makes sense. I just want to bring my baby home. Charlene had flown halfway across the world after getting a call no mother ever wants. Now she was watching her son's husband sit silently behind police glass, avoiding eye contact, offering no explanation. What began as a fairy tale was unraveling detail by detail, and the deeper authorities dug, the more Wendell's mask began to crack. But there was still one person they hadn't spoken to. The man who may have sparked everything, Marcus Reed. The truth, once buried deep, was now emerging in fragments. each piece revealing a twisted story of betrayal. Authorities digging into Marcus Reed's background had their first breakthrough when they discovered his connection to Wendell. Despite Marcus initially denying any close relationship, the evidence told a different story. WhatsApp logs showed countless messages, flirty exchanges, photos, and voice notes, all revealing a side of Wendell that the public had never seen. There were messages from as far back as 2 days before the wedding, a timeline that painted a stark contrast to the life Wendell had promised his husband, Deontay. "Can't wait to see you again." One voice note read, Marcus' voice smooth and playful. "You always make my day better." As the texts unfolded, the authorities were struck by the intensity of their connection. Wendell, it seemed, had been living a double life, one in which his love for Marcus was much deeper than anyone could have guessed. The flirtation was clear, the longing palpable. And then came Wendell's chilling admission to his lawyer, the words lingering in the air like a slow burn. "I didn't mean to hurt him. I just couldn't live a lie anymore." But what was the lie? The lie that had driven him to murder his husband? Was it his love for Marcus? Was it something darker? Deontay had known about Wendell's infidelities long before the honeymoon. It wasn't the first time Wendell had betrayed him. In fact, it was an open wound that had festered for years. The first affair had been forgiven. Deontay believed in second chances, in the idea that love could heal any scar. But this was different. Wendell's affair with Marcus wasn't just a physical attraction. It was an emotional entanglement, a betrayal that cut deeper than any of Deontay's past wounds. In a moment of solitude, Deontay wrote in his journal, his words filled with a raw vulnerability that Wendell would never read. "He's the only man I've ever trusted with my life. I never thought I would have to doubt him, but now I'm lost. I don't know who he really is anymore. He says he loves me, but I'm not sure he even knows what that means." Deontay had tried to forgive Wendell, tried to believe that love could conquer all. But now, as the layers of deception unraveled, it was clear that trust had been shattered long before their honeymoon. The police began to piece together the shocking truth. Wendell had fallen in love with Marcus, and the relationship had consumed him. It wasn't just a brief affair, it had become an obsession. But the emotional stakes were higher than ever before. Wendell had spent his life building an empire with Deontay by his side, but the love he felt for Marcus had overshadowed everything else. In the quiet corners of his mind, he could no longer distinguish between loyalty and desire. As the investigation continued, it became clear Wendell had lived a life of deception, leading to a deadly confrontation fueled by forbidden love. But there was still more to uncover. Marcus, who had once seemed like a mere flirtation, was now a central figure in this tragic tale. Wendell Carter's return to the United States was anything but ordinary. The image of the self-made millionaire, once admired for his business acumen and polished persona, was now shattered beyond repair. He was escorted through the airport in handcuffs, his face pale and resigned. The man who had once commanded attention in boardrooms across the world was now just another defendant in the court of public opinion. National media outlets couldn't get enough of the scandal. Headlines screamed, "Honeymoon horror, millionaire murder mystery, the billionaire's secret, a deadly love triangle in paradise." News anchors speculated wildly, pulling in every detail they could find about Wendell's life, his wealth, his relationship with Deontay. The public, hungry for details, devoured each new piece of information, and the courtroom became the epicenter of a media frenzy. The trial was set against the backdrop of a nationwide scandal. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the prosecution prepared to reveal their case. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated exit strategy. The prosecutor made it clear from the start that Wendell's actions were premeditated. The evidence, they argued, was damning. The searches for how to strangle someone without leaving fingerprints, the flight bookings, the secretive messages, and the meticulous planning that went into every aspect of Deontay's murder. Wendell had killed not in a moment of rage, but with cold, calculated intent. Wendell's defense team countered by painting a different picture, one of emotional instability and panic. They argued that Wendell's obsession with Marcus had driven him into a state of confusion where he was no longer able to distinguish right from wrong. They claimed that Wendell was emotionally overwhelmed, struggling with feelings of guilt and the pressure of living a lie. His relationship with Deontay, they argued, had been strained by past infidelities, and this final betrayal was the result of an emotional breakdown. But as the prosecution laid out the evidence, detailed, unflinching, and relentless, the defense's arguments seemed to falter. The coldness of Wendell's actions couldn't be dismissed as a mere lapse of judgment. The jury was left with little doubt. This had been an act of deliberate murder. During the trial, Deontay's family took the stand, their grief palpable in the courtroom. Deontay's mother, Charlene, gave an emotional testimony that left the room silent. Her voice trembled as she spoke of her son, his hopes, and his dreams for the future. He was so full of life, so trusting. He didn't deserve this, she said, eyes red from tears. He was always there for Wendell. How could Wendell do this to him? How could he betray the man who gave him everything? After days of testimony, deliberations began. The tension was unbearable as the jury deliberated late into the night. Finally, the decision was made. The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read aloud. Guilty. The word echoed through the room, met by a quiet gasp from the gallery. Wendell's face remained impassive, though a flicker of something, regret, maybe, passed through his eyes. Deontay's family quietly sighed, some of them wiping away tears as the truth had finally come to light. Wendell Carter's life would never be the same again. The judge looked down at him, a mixture of resolve and sympathy in his gaze. You are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was met with a quiet murmur of approval from the gallery. Wendell's punishment was final. There would be no second chances, no new beginnings. His wealth and success had failed to protect him from the consequences of his actions. In the months that followed, the media continued to cover the case. But there was a shift. The sensationalism began to fade, and what remained was the painful reality of the crime. An entire life destroyed by one man's inability to reconcile his desires with the promises he had made. Wendell, once a celebrated millionaire, was now a symbol of a much darker side of ambition. His story became a cautionary tale about obsession, betrayal, and the destructive power of secrets. For Deontay's family, the trial had brought justice, but it had come too late. The man they had loved, the man they had trusted, was gone, and all that remained was the cold, unfeeling reality of what had happened. The courtroom doors had closed. Wendell Carter was now just another prisoner in a maximum security facility. His life, once filled with luxury and power, had come to a crashing halt. But inside the prison walls, Wendell seemed almost indifferent. No tears, no regrets, not even a hint of remorse. It was as if the man who had once been adored by so many was now a mere shell of himself. The prison would be his home for the rest of his life. A life spent far from the world he had once ruled. The world would move on, and so would the media. But Wendell, behind bars, would remain an enigma. His true feelings about the murder of his husband still locked away, never to be fully understood. As for Marcus Reed, the flight attendant who had ignited the tragic chain of events, his life took a drastic turn as well. The once flirtatious young man who had captivated Wendell's attention suddenly vanished from the public eye. Marcus quit his job at the airline and disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. Was he complicit in Wendell's crime? Or was he simply another pawn in a much larger, darker game? We may never know the full extent of Marcus' involvement, but his silence spoke volumes. Deontay's family, devastated but determined, turned their grief into action. His mother, Charlene, and his siblings launched the Deontay Harris LGBTQ Domestic Violence Awareness Fund. The foundation's mission was to raise awareness about the hidden dangers within relationships in the LGBTQ community, especially where love could turn toxic, manipulative, and ultimately deadly. They wanted to make sure that no one else would have to endure what Deontay did and to ensure that his death would not be in vain. Deontay believed love could heal anything. He was wrong. He gave everything he had to someone who was never going to give him the same. But I think he would want everyone to know love can heal, just not when it's built on lies. In the end, it wasn't the paradise of the Maldives or the illusion of love that killed Deontay. It was the betrayal of the man he trusted most. One moment of weakness, one selfish decision, and a fairy tale wedding became a tragic true crime story we'll never forget. What would you do if the person you loved most turned out to be your killer? Comment below with your thoughts on Wendell's motive. Was it passion, obsession, or pure evil? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Daily Family Crimes channel. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story where love and lies collide with deadly consequences.